Hi, I'm Ashley Rambo with Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and I am here today with Megan Pharaoh of Pharaoh Real Estate. And she is a real estate agent that specializes in divorces. Megan, I'm just going to kind of kick it off with what you do and what makes being a divorce real estate agent different.
Okay, great. So I am a licensed realtor in the state of Georgia, and I have an advanced education in divorce specifically. So I've niched in this space, and it's called an RCSD, Real Estate Collaboration Specialist in Divorce. And I'm trained to collaborate mostly with divorce attorneys to, help assist their divorcing couples through the process, truly through the process, not just after the settlement agreement and beyond, right? And I would say that that's probably what differentiates a realtor that specializes in divorce from, your other real estate agent. We take a very consultative approach on the front end with the clients. We like to be brought in as soon as possible, no later than discovery, because we're able to help the attorney gather the home documents. We're able to consult with the clients about the property, whether or not somebody plans to stay in the property, which we consult with and help to assist that individual with their financing, their cash out refi, making sure that they've got longevity in their home ownership, or if we end up having to, sell the marital asset. So being able to get that understanding during the discovery process is going to help with the settlement agreement. I think it really cuts down on having to do any revisions too, which I know that the attorneys appreciate.
Absolutely.
The fewer times that you have to go back to your attorney to ask a question, the better. So having, being able to leverage someone like myself, attorneys love it because they're like, you should just call Megan. Mm-hmm. And, we can sort of work through whatever question or challenges they might be having. And that's really, I think that's what attracts me so much to this space in real estate, that when you look at your resale, it can be very, very transactional, and it's kind of, you can kind of expect the same thing over and over. In divorce, obviously there's a lot of different mitigating factors. Everybody has a different story. People have different goals. And I think it's important that they have a team that is able to ground them in those super high emotion moments, to help them make better decisions for them in the long run, right?
Right. So I can only represent one person. Mm-hmm. I have to choose husband or wife when it comes to something like this. Are you able to actually work with both of them?
That's a really great question. So I would say most of the time I am either referred to one or the other, or referred by their attorney to their client, right? Okay. As you say, you only represent one. Now, when I'm brought in, I like to say that I work for the equity of the property. I really am a neutral third party for the most part. It's not about taking sides, and it's not about working for her or for him. If the goal is to, having to sell the property, then truly what's going to be best for everybody is getting the most money out of that property. And then I leave it up to the attorneys to, come up with a settlement agreement on how to disperse that equity, right? But you got to have the equity in the first place.
Right.
And so we don't want our clients to be negotiating with what I like to call monopoly money, mm-hmm. During mediation, where we're just guessing based off of Zestimates or whatever. Right. I'm able to bring my expertise. I'm able to really talk about market trends now, or even 6 months from now, right? Because sometimes divorce takes a long time. And so the information that we gather today might change when we list 6 months from now or 8 months from now. And being able to have that understanding and somebody to explain that to your clients, for you, I think that is very helpful. So I stay very grounded. I stay very neutral. We don't get dragged into the drama. That's not what we're here for. We're here to sell the house and get everybody paid, get your clients paid. And my primary objective is to preserve the future home ownership eligibility of both people's. So as we know, divorce can be very expensive, and oftentimes if we're able to figure out a way to have these clients have like a softer landing on the other side of it, so that they can repurchase. It's all about like preserving that homeownership dream and, the American dream. And, what better way to keep your clients forward thinking, than that promise that on the other side of this, we're going to be able to get you in a new property. And if it's not right away, if we're going to rent for a year, you still have me for however long you need me to help you get there so that we can repurchase.
That's actually one of the biggest things that my clients like when we have these conversations is, what am I going to do if I lose my home, or like we're locked in at 2% interest? How is this going to work moving forward? So when you go into this process, you're able to kind of help them navigate that, even like from this, not just sale of the house, drop it 10% every 30 days type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure you hate that language.
Yes, actually, I'm glad that you brought that up. So, I am not an attorney, and what you guys do is incredible. And I really am just here to like assist and collaborate within my, my own reach. But sometimes having language, like scheduled price reductions in settlement agreements, it actually can be damaging to your client. It hog ties the agent in being able to negotiate and like read the market. So if like you have structured negotiations in the settlement agreement that I have to adhere to, but the market is saying something different, then we might actually be leaving a lot more money on the table for your clients. And so if the goal is to preserve that future home ownership eligibility and that financial stability on the other side of this, then it's really important that we're able to collaborate around a case. So Ashley, this is what the market is looking like right now. This is, sort of days on market. And if we're overpriced, it may not be by 10%. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It may only be 3%. So keeping the language so that, as the expert, I've got some latitude, because I'm always going to work for the equity of the house. I'm always going to make sure that the decisions that are made is going to yield the highest profit for the client.
Right.
And the only way I can do that is by having a little bit of latitude in that respect.
And do you provide the attorneys with some good language in order to, I mean, I know you don't write the settlement agreement, but like kind of like parameters that would work for us to be able to say, like, this is what we need to make sure that equity is preserved?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And that could be kind of customized, right, for each client and based on their goal, and depending on, sometimes it's like the husband is going to be paying for any and all repair, or the wife, I had one where the wife was actually footing the bill until the property was sold, and then she was going to be reimbursed out of his net. So like, obviously it's going to be customized. It's never going to be the same, again, which is why I love it. But yeah, helping you guys with like telling you what I need, and then you guys put it in the legal jargon is very helpful. I've also had an attorney, write me in as the tiebreaker. Okay. So if there's language in there where the parties cannot come together pertaining to real estate, then I'm the tiebreaker. Okay. Yeah.
That's actually great language.
It's very helpful. And it also, I think it just keeps contention down.
Yeah.
Most of the time when I tell people that I niche in divorce real estate, I get one of two reactions. One, I get, oh, that sounds terrible. Or two, what's divorce real estate? I've never heard of that. And I think that there is this like notion, at least among other real estate professionals, that divorce real estate is like high drama, high stress, whatever. And I have not found that to be true so far, knock on wood. I mean, obviously it's a hugely life-changing event. And then so is moving. I mean, it's like two major stressors. But I have found it, most of the time, the clients, like, they want to behave, right? So like when it comes to dealing with me, everybody's on their best behavior. Most of the time they're not trying to bring up how we got here. It's just, we're here and this is what we need you to do for us.
Yeah.
So I have found it really to oftentimes just be very collaborative. And then we have had moments. I mean, you know, we have our moments where I get calls from, you know, both of them afterwards. They're like, I'm so sorry. And because it's highly emotional.
Yeah.
And it's my job to, you know, help ground them, help re-engage that prefrontal cortex so that we're having, you know, good, productive conversations within the parameters of the settlement agreement and the resale of the property. There was something I was going to add to that, but you know, my brain is just like squirreled. So
I mean, I'll tell you this much. When it comes to like managing emotions, like the way you managed my emotions, and I'm not even going through a divorce, it's an incredibly high stress situation to like have to go through this like home buying and home selling and, you know, and then the unknown of what I'm going to do afterwards. So having, you know, somebody who's able to manage those expectations, I imagine brings much more to the table when it comes to mediation. Yeah. Being able to like have that like kind of handled on the front end where it's one less thing that we as attorneys have to negotiate because they've already talked about it and they know if nothing else on the settlement agreement, this is what we're doing with our house.
Right. Right. And, you know, reaching that settlement agreement and having it on paper and then living it and putting into action, even though it's like, okay, we've agreed, we're feeling like good about it, it stirs up stuff. Yeah. I mean, I would say that probably some of the most devastating case files are when, you know, they're divorcing and they've got kids and this is the property that they raised their children in, or the, you know, maybe one of the spouses wanted to keep the house and they couldn't for whatever reason. And so I would say that those are probably some of the most heartbreaking. So, you know, what we do is we just try and tie it down into that dream for the future. Mm-hmm. Right? Because we cannot change the reality that this is a situation. We're going to make the most of it. We're going to get you the most money that we can so that you can start your life over. And then we're going to be there for you as you're starting your life over. Yeah. You know, oftentimes this will impact credit. Sometimes you'll have spouses where they're the ones that negatively impacted your credit. And it's going to take some time to rebuild. And so we offer services. We offer credit repair services that are totally free. To help, you know, individuals repair their credit score, increase their credit score so that we can go ahead and fulfill that dream of homeownership again, right? It's tough, you know, like you get married, you buy a house, you have kids, like you feel like I did it, like I have it made, and then the rug gets pulled out from underneath you and you're like, wait, I have to do this all over again. And that can be really scary and lonely. Yeah. Right? And so, I love it. Going back to agents feeling like this space just has a lot of negative connotation. I think you and I have talked about that too. Yeah. You share with people what you do for a living and they're like, oh, it's awful. But when you're in that space, you don't feel like what you're doing is something awful. No. Like I feel, and I'm sure you'll agree, I feel like I'm making a very positive impact on people having a very negative life experience. Yeah. Right.
I do. I feel like I operate with an integrity.
Yeah.
You know, everything I do is within like the core values that this firm has established, which is I think why I like about you so much and why we've clicked so well, because your core values with your company is very similar to what we've established here. Yeah. And having that kind of like melding in terms of just integrity and what you do and grace in what you do and dealing with people in their worst. I mean, their absolute worst because of what they're going through.
Right.
And handling that the way I've seen you handle it is something to be, you know, commended.
Thank you. And again, like, I don't know if it's just because I really love it or like I was made to do this, but my husband says I have a mental illness. I have that, oh, that's hard. Here, hold my beer. Like, that's my problem is that anything that's hard, I'm like immediately attracted to, or anything that people think is hard.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. But, you know, I what I have found is that, like, overall, I think in most cases, and maybe this is what you've experienced with your clients, you know, prior to our relationship, you know, bringing the realtor in kind of happens after the settlement agreement. Yep. And it's usually one of them picks one or one picks three and the other one has final choice. And it's typically not based on any like true merit, experience, productivity, it's like my best friend's sister or my second cousin or something like that, right? Family friend.
It's like you're quoting every single settlement agreement
So you know what I'm talking
done.
about. And I think that that's probably the biggest mistake. Is one, bringing a realtor in after the settlement agreement's already been made, because all of the important real estate decisions were made without the real estate professional. Like, it's mind-blowing to me, right? So bring them in as early as possible, and then find yourself somebody who really does understand the delicate nuances with divorce real estate. You know, you can be both compassionate and discreet, but more importantly, professional, right? And that's not easy to do. And I deal with realtors all the time, just in regular, you know, resale situations, and they can get very high emotional, you know, and so
attorneys too.
Yeah. So, you know, you just want to make sure that you're picking the right person. And that's why I love being brought in specifically by the attorneys, because I'm a very clear, neutral third party, you know, and I'm here to provide value. I'm here to consult and to collaborate and to, you know, get them the most money for their property.
Yeah. I actually, as a total side note, after our first conversation, started training our attorneys to put different language into our settlement agreements.
Oh, I love that.
We don't do the 10% anymore.
No kidding.
I think I came up with some verbiage, some very basic, like, per the realtor's recommendation.
Yeah, that is wonderful. I mean, because it really does, like, I mean, if you're paying a professional, you know, for their opinion, but then you've hogtied their negotiations and their marketing strategies by a settlement agreement that was created, you know, between two potentially arguing individuals.
Yeah. And
you know,
when you explain to me, like, how that 10% can knock you from one, like, bracket to the other, like, it really, like, kind of struck a chord with me, like, the disservice that I had been doing. And that we do it across the board. Like, this isn't a me personally thing. This is a attorney practice. It is standard operating. And, you know, I'll be the first to say, like, at least in my practice, that's going to change, just based on what I've learned from you. And such a niche.
So cool. That's so neat. I love that. And what she's talking about with brackets is that most home buyers shop in brackets, usually of $50,000 typically. So you'll have your buyers that are looking from $4 to $450 or $450 to $5. So if you've got a property that's listed at $475, you are directly marketing to home buyer searches between $450 and $500. Okay. If you know, knock it down to let's say you just do a arbitrary, you know, like you said, price reduction, not based on any sort of market statistics. It's just because it's in the settlement agreement. You could drop yourself down from $475, let's say, to $465. Let's say it's just a $10,000 reduction. One, you're not marketing to a new buyer bracket. You're still marketing to the same people. You're trying to recapture and re-engage people who might have already seen the property and lost interest. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to result in an offer, but you really need somebody to be able to read the market to say, this is how far off the mark we were in price. Or maybe it's not price at all. Maybe it's condition. Maybe it's paint color. I know that sounds like such a small thing, but if buyers are walking through the property and they're so distracted by the color of the walls that they're not able to see the bones of the house, they're not going to be able to imagine themselves in the property, and they're going to charge you for it. If they write an offer, they're going to charge you for it, and they're going to add 20%. Okay, because buyers will always overestimate. So we try and obviously circumvent those things during the pre-listing prep, whatever the client is willing to do, whether it be paint or repair or nothing at all. You know, we will strategize around their ability and present the best product that we can to the market. And you know, when we talk about scheduled price reductions of 10% every 30 days, you know, we sort of have this like working algorithm in the industry where if you're getting a lot of traffic, if you've listed your property, you're getting a lot of showings, and you're getting some nibbles but no bites, you're probably only about 3% off, which is a huge difference from 10.
Yeah.
Okay, you're probably only about 3% off. If you are getting some traffic and kind of some conflicting feedback, you know, you're kind of in that middle range there. You're probably more like 4.5 to 5% off. And then if you aren't getting any traffic at all, nobody wants to show your home, you're out there begging, you are at least 6% off, if not more. So none of those numbers are 10%, by the way.
I was actually going to say, how often does it happen where it's actually like 10%?
Oh my gosh. Typically that is the case if we did go under contract, there was an inspection, and then the inspection revealed a very significant underlying issue, to where we had to make a huge price reduction, because there either wasn't money to fix it or, you know, whatever. I did have a divorce once. I don't know if we can do like story time. And it was like the most charming log cabin and beautiful property. And it was, you know, they were getting a divorce and they had to sell the property. Well, the cabin was white, which is unusual. And we went under contract, and the inspector flagged the property and said, "You're not allowed to paint log cabins. It's detrimental to the wood, and your house will essentially rot from the inside out. This whole house has got to be sandblasted, restained. All the drywall's got to be repaired." They were looking at $150,000 in concession to the buyer. That's what the buyer wanted. And we were just absolutely dumbfounded. One, why would anybody paint a log cabin if that is not what you should do? And then two, these kids, I mean, they were very young. I mean, these kids, like, this is their equity. That would be like everything, you know? And so we let the buyers terminate, and I went to work. I had multiple contractors come out to the property because I wanted to understand what we were actually talking about here, and if it really was that bad. And so we had several come out because a lot of them either wouldn't touch it or they didn't want to advise one way or the other. Finally, we were able to determine that it wasn't paint at all. It was opaque stain, which is completely acceptable for log cabins. We went back to that buyer and another interested buyer, and we let them know, like, hey, we did some more due diligence and research on this. Turns out cabin's in great shape. It's just stain. It's not paint. Next thing you know, we're in a multiple offer situation. So on one hand, they were looking at having to cough up $150,000. We did a little bit more digging because, you know, this just can't be true. Or if it is, tell me why. And then the result was that they had multiple offers in the end and ended up selling the home to, you know, a great new buyer. So, you know, it's things like that, going the extra mile, asking the right questions. I think that really makes the difference in your experience with selling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great story. I'm really actually equal parts happy that it worked out and that it wasn't paint.
Yeah. And do you know the whole time, it was like a 50-gallon like thing of like stain in the garage, the whole time, like
the stain was right there.
The stain was right there. Like,
stop.
Yeah, it was right there in the garage the whole time. And like, I guess everybody had overlooked it. But I had a paint contractor come out and he did like the water test and water bead test. He's like, this is stain, I'm pretty sure. And then we confirmed it when we found the 50-gallon stain tub. And God, what a relief. Like, you know, you're already having this huge life-changing event that's very, you know, contentious, and then your only like hope is the equity you're going to get out of this house to start your life over. And then because of one inspector, you know, giving his one opinion on something, it was a 6-figure mistake.
Dear Lord.
Totally nuts.
I don't know what I would do in that situation. Like, that just made my tummy drop thinking about it.
Yeah, imagine how they felt. I'm glad we didn't give up though.
Yeah, no, me too. And I think that's what what I admire about you. Like, you went that extra mile. I don't know if every real estate agent would have done that.
No, I think a lot of them roll over.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, you know, and maybe that, like, I don't know if that makes me tough or like kind of a pain in the butt. You know, I guess depending on who's talking to me. But no, I don't tend to roll over, and you know, most of it is just because I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
And most people, I don't think that they ask the right questions to yield the results that they want.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I said, I'm professionally and personally impressed with what you did. I mean, we would have taken their original offer, and you're like, no, let's ask for more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you got us a great deal for it. So that mortgage headache aside,
Yeah,
got
awesome.
me a great deal.
Yeah, I can't do much about that, but yeah, I'm very excited. I'm thrilled with your result too. Yeah, they're all, if we make it to the closing table, honestly, I feel that I've done good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not where we want to be. I mean, I had one divorcing couple. We listed at a time in the market where it just took a dump, and it did cost them an equity, and we did everything that we could to keep the energy alive around the property. We had a lot of attraction. We had some fundamental challenges to overcome with location, and the layout was very unique. I loved this property. It was a brand new build, but we just had to wait to find the right buyer, and it took a while, and sometimes it does. And so you've got two people who are divorcing. They're changing their lives. You are in charge of, getting them the equity out of the biggest asset that they have. And you have to keep that momentum and that energy and that trust alive for 6 months or more. I mean, that is, that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah,
well, you deal with your clients for years sometimes.
Yeah. No, I mean, normally around year 12, I'm giving the pep talks of year 12, not year 12.
12-year divorce.
Not 12-year divorce.
That should be a book title. The 12-year divorce. Interesting. I love it.
No, usually, they're good up until mediation, which is about the 6-month mark. And then it's waiting for a trial and trying to figure out, are we going to try to continue the negotiation type thing? Mm-hmm. And that's when, for us, we see that same thing, that trust fade and that energy decrease, which I actually want to kind of segue with us to what you just mentioned with markets. Let's talk about markets for a little bit.
Okay.
Markets, sometimes they're great, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're crazy. What would you advise to a person who is going through a market in any of those stages? Is it worth it to stick it out with your soon-to-be ex for the extra 6 months to get that better market that may or may not come? Or do you cut your losses? How do you handle something like that?
Okay, so that's a multifaceted question. Let's set the stage first to talk about, when we talk about markets specifically, when you turn on the news and you see that the real estate market is down, they are talking about a national level. Real estate is extremely hyper-local to areas, so you can very easily, as a national average, numbers aren't looking so good, but when you talk about areas like Georgia, North Georgia, Cherokee County, Fulton County, Forsyth. I mean, these areas are growing year over year over year, and some of them are absolutely exploding. So while you may have markets in other areas of the country that are not performing well, if you look at the local markets in your area, that's going to first give you the best idea on what your listing experience could be if you were to list now or projecting into the future. I do not have a crystal ball. I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I wish that, and I'll consult, I'll consult with somebody today, but then we actually don't make a move for 6 months. And so a large part of that consulting is to say, our markets are volatile. So the numbers that we discussed today very well may be very, very different. Could be up, down, or it could be exactly the same 6 months from now. So it's important that we're constantly touching base, especially if margins are very tight. If you've got a couple that are basically going to be breaking even because, let's say, they took out a HELOC or they refied a bunch of times and they used their house as a bank and there's not any equity left, those margins are going to be super tight. So it's very important that we're watching the market and strategizing on the best time to list. You asked, is it better to stick it out with my spouse or wait to file based on the market? And I've actually had people reach out to me and ask me about that. Or they'll say, we're thinking about getting a divorce, but it's going to be expensive, so we're only going to do it if there's X amount of money in the house. So I've had conversations like that. And I mean, just from a personal standpoint, we only get one life. And if you do think that a divorce is in your future, if you don't think that you're with the right person, if you feel like you've got irreconcilable differences, if you've tried counseling and it's not working, or if you're in a situation that's highly toxic or abusive, no amount of money should convince you to stay. Okay, just from a personal perspective. Now, if it's not like that, and it's a little bit more of a, we're friends, but the love is lost or whatever, bring me in early on. Let's take a look at the house and strategize around that. Oftentimes, I'll have couples that plan on getting a divorce, but they'll sell before. If you have already filed, you cannot list your real estate property until a settlement agreement is created with your attorney. Even if you're both in agreement, you got to have some, right? You got to have some sort of legal documentation.
Are you okay with consent order? Sometimes we do that where we'll get a judge to say, hey, this is a really good time to go.
Yeah, right. If they're just like, hey, 50-50, we're good, let's just get it on the market, then we can go ahead and do that. Now, sometimes only one spouse is on the deed. Not both. That is definitely when I would want to have legal paperwork, right? Because it entitles the other spouse to have a say, and it keeps one from selling that property from out from underneath them, right? And we don't want that to happen either. But be advised, like if he is on the deed and she is not, he's the only signer, right? So we do want to have some sort of legal paperwork from the attorneys. And then the closing attorney is going to need instructions on disbursement of equity, right? And since we're an equitable distribution stage, it's not always 50-50, right? And so those numbers are super important to have ahead of time. We don't want to wait until the closing table where it's like, no, I'm supposed to get this much. We want to have everything, in writing. And I actually had, I had a client ask me recently. She said, if we are in agreement on how we want to split the house, but not an agreement on how we want to deal with the kids, do we have to wait until we have an agreement on everything before we can sell? And the answer to that is no. Again, as long as we have paperwork saying how to handle the real estate, and then they can, with their attorneys, handle, the kids or any debt, anything else, right? Okay, so we're looking at our local market. We're strategizing and trying to time the divorce with the sale of the home. You do not have to be officially divorced to list the property, which I think is a misconception. I think that a lot of people think they have to be totally done. But as long as we have a settlement agreement in writing, we can go ahead and list the house. If you have not filed, then we treat it as like a regular listing, right?
No standing order.
Exactly. And, then hopefully you two are on good enough terms that you know how you want to handle the equity. But there's a couple of different ways to do it. But again, I don't know that I would, if you're in a situation that you want to get out of, I don't know that I would wait to sell or wait to file simply because you're trying to time it with the market. I tell all of my clients, whether they're divorcing clients or traditional resale or, listing clients, it's so important that you time your real estate transaction, not just with the market, but also with your life. The timing has to be perfect. And I've done this long enough to know when it's not. And when somebody is forcing something and the transaction is a challenge, right? And I can tell, that this is not, you can tell there's like an energy around it. And so when the timing is right for your life and for the market, it will be perfect, and I'll handle the rest.
I think that is actually the perfect place to close. Okay. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to me about this. I always find it fascinating talking to you about how this side of the world works. As attorneys, we deal with the X's and O's of the divorce and the legal agreements and things like that. But you're the boots on the ground on what happens to our clients afterwards, which is why I feel so comfortable putting them in your hands.
Thank you. I appreciate that.